Welcome back to Psychology of Peacebuilding. Week 3 is when I begin to go through the many theories and techniques that I introduce you to in this course. Please don't be overwhelmed or intimidated. I cover a lot of introductory material. You must be working with the activities in your workbooks and doing the reading because they will review all of this and help you digest it, raise your questions, get clarity. And what I recommend to my students is every week pick a couple of the things I introduce to you and really make them yours. Feel comfortable with them in practicing with daily, weekly conflict, read up on them, just feel like I got this with at least a couple. You don't need to master it all in a beginning introductory course. Okay, I am going to start today with the levels of conflict and resolution, peace building. The top level of this model, and this is reviewed in your reading as well, is the international, between nation states, like what we're seeing with Ukraine and Russia right now. Most people, when they hear peace building, think of the international level, the United Nations, international law, human rights, all of it. That's only the top level, sort of the culminating level, and what we'll be focused on in this course are the lower levels. So let me introduce the other levels to you. The next level, after the international, is going to be, let me start at the bottom here with the intrapersonal level. The intrapersonal, so I've told you international is at the top and intrapersonal is at the bottom. Now I'm also introducing interpersonal because most people, when they hear conflict resolution, think interpersonal. And inter is between. So between nation states at the international level, between two or more people at the interpersonal level. So what is the intrapersonal level? It's what lies within each one of us, our inner world, all of our attitudes, thinking, our emotions, that rich inner world that psychology studies about what it means to be a human being. A lot of what we study and you're introduced to in this course involves both the intrapersonal level, living inspiration really helps you with that, and the interpersonal level, and living inspiration also introduces, what goes on between two different human beings. So that's the interpersonal level. We want to also consider the next level, which is intragroup. All of us are born into families. We may not stay with that family, that group unit. I know some of you are foster children and adopted. We have a large population here at Dominguez. It may not be the healthiest group. It might be pretty conflicted and violent without any peace, but we've got that group. Many of us are born into religious groups, cultural groups, right? So there's the group level, and intra-group is what goes on within our groups. There's a lot of conflict and a lot of peace building that needs to happen within the marriage, for example, within the family, within cultures, and within religious groups. So that's what intragroup means. Let's go to the next, because this is one that you're all acutely aware of in Southern California. Intergroup, between different groups. So we've got warring gangs, right? We've got cliques in high school, mean kids who are bullying, outsiders, excuse the language. But that is the conflict that happens between different groups. Men and women, that's intergroup as well. Generational conflict. There are a lot of possibilities when we look at these levels of conflict. And all of this, stacks up and relates to each other. So when you are analyzing a real world conflict, you need to consider all of these different possibilities. Now, the group also includes, let's go to the next level because this overlaps. The systemic level is where it gets complicated, right? But that is most of these levels. So some of you are going to be confused with some of the differences between the different levels, and that's okay. Anytime you use or refer to one of these levels when you're doing conflict analysis or proposed peace building, you're going to get credit for demonstrating your course learning. So once again, you don't need to be masterful here. But next week, I will be talking a little bit more about systems. Systems, let me give you some examples. Now, our families are systems because we have generational and cultural influences and how we relate to each other in a system, how mom relates to dad, how dad relates to each of the children, right? It creates a complex system. So it's not just a group, it's a complex system. Anytime we're in a work organization, that's a complex system with all the different people involved, different relationships, different cultures, different ways of thinking. That's a complex system. Our communities are complex systems, and particularly most of us are living in cities in Southern California. You see why we need to have these levels of conflict and resolution peace building because it's so complicated. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is to take, our criminal justice system. That is a great example of a toxic system that needs analysis and peace building at all the levels I have introduced you to. Now, I'm not going to be saying more right now. I'm trying to introduce these levels to you. What I'd like to go to next is talking about experiential learning and action theory. So we'll come back to toxic systems later, but our criminal justice system is a horrific example. Okay, let me talk about action theory, and I am showing you a slide from one of my undergraduates. I've been mentoring a McNair Scholar for the last year, and if you don't know what McNair Scholars are, you need to check it out because it's an incredible community where students mentor with faculty who share their interests and work together for a sustained period of time. Well, Tiffany, who is in the business college, came to me because she wanted to work with customer conflict in her job. And that's a wonderful example of the kind of action research, the action theory that I introduce you to in this course. You're not just going to be studying theories and techniques that some academic created. Yeah, we don't need to go further with her presentation here. This is good enough. Let's just hang out with this slide and let me introduce action research to you. As I introduced you when I introduced myself in the syllabus, this is not some ivory tower academic course where you get all sorts of academic theories and techniques. No, these are all field tested in the real world, and they have proved themselves. And that's what action research is. You create a theory of what needs to happen in a particular conflict and you apply it to the real world, and you see if your theory fits, helps the situation or hurts the situation. And if it helps, bingo, it's a good action theory. If it doesn't work, if it hurts, you're going to have to alter, revise, and continue this cycle that Tiffany shows you here. She does it in a more sophisticated way on this slide. I love it. She did a beautiful job, and this is her Student Research Day presentation. This is what she was doing with customer conflict, and it's what I want you to do here in this course as you analyze your daily, weekly conflict and then make proposals of what might help with peace building. Okay, this is experiential learning. I think I introduced that to you earlier. You are learning by doing here, and so you will need to be observing. You will need to be observing what is going on with a particular conflict, and then test out your action theories to build peace. Now, my undergrads in the past have asked me, well, what does that mean? What is peace building? So I like to introduce a bit of the worldwide views of what they call negative peace and positive peace. Normally, negative peace is the absence of war or violent conflict. And you in this course can focus on violent conflict because most of you have known violent conflict and face it on a regular basis. So that's negative peace. That counts as peace building. Anything you can do to diffuse, decrease the violence in conflict is potent peace building. Positive peace has to do with the levels that I just introduced you to. It's all the things we need to do and create to change a toxic family, to change a toxic organization, yes, to change destructive behavior, to diffuse violence. All of that is positive peace, and we will be talking about democracy building, inclusive democracy building, because that's all positive peace. Okay, let me talk about reflective practice. Reflective practice is what you do when you are creating action theories and applying them to real-world conflict to see if it helps or hurts and what needs to happen. That's reflective practice, that constant analysis. Is this peace building helping or hurting? Is this theory helping me understand this conflict or not? So that's a constant evaluation reflection. That's reflective practice. I mentioned experimental and clinical psychology if you look under week 3 in your syllabus, because I want to say that a lot of what happens in the labs on university campuses in experimental and clinical psychology doesn't always translate to the real world. Maybe they've only worked, this used to be years ago, not right now, and certainly not Dominguez, but for years they just worked with white male students, right? So there's no way that those theories and those lab results could translate to a diverse campus or a diverse community like Dominguez. Just didn't work. So we're not going to be studying much of the experimental and clinical psychology, but we are going to be studying cognitive, educational, some of the other branches of psychology where they've had better success with translating to real world. Let me mention to you learned helplessness, because you will read about this in your reading, but this explains a lot of the people in the world who are just paralyzed in the face of conflict. They have been oppressed for most of their life. Let's talk about women. And they just have been socialized into learning helplessness. They are disempowered. So much of what you will be introduced to throughout this course, I will call empowerment theory. Field-tested theories and techniques for empowering women and other oppressed groups so they shed this learned helplessness and step into active, effective peace building. Moral agency and self-determination are going to be themes throughout this course because you must empower yourself to make decisions for yourself, right? And that's what self-determination is all about. You will be introduced to what negotiation experts call a best alternative to a negotiated agreement as a way to empower yourself. Now, a best alternative empowers you no matter where you are. You may be all by yourself, right? You don't need to be negotiating. Getting in the habit of brainstorming alternative courses of action and then choosing the best one for yourself is very empowering. Another thing you'll be introduced to empower yourself is alliance building, particularly power alliances. Getting to know people who can work with you, like look at the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And together you are more powerful than alone. Our dreamers on campus, that's another good example, right? So you'll be looking at alliance building as empowerment. And then the last thing I'd like to say this week that you will be introduced to is the classical ombuds, the professional peace builder, whistleblower that government agencies employ to investigate complaint and expose corruption, fraud, all the stuff that's going on in toxic systems. Sweden created this position to hold government accountable. The CSU has only had organizational ombuds who basically try to do peace building within, but more and more you're seeing citizen oversight with police, for example, where independent outside people are holding organizations and toxic systems accountable. Or, you're seeing it with some journalists right now. They're exposing what's going on in a toxic system. So that's important empowerment for you to know, because I think we need a lot more classical ombuds in the world and in the United States today. Okay, as I said, I introduce a lot every week, but your reading will review this. You're always welcome to ask me questions in Canvas or when we talk, so I can help you understand. Have a good week.